Good morning, and now we are going to listen to a video by Dr. John Bruni, who is the founder and the CEO of SAGE International, a think tank in Australia. And he is going to be sharing his perspective about the AUKUS initiative, which is formed by Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States.
AUKUS is a trilateral security pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, announced on the 15th of September 2021. Under the pact, the US and the UK will help Australia to acquire nuclear-powered submarines, although the details of this will only come out in about 18 months from now. While not specifically aimed at any one country, AUKUS, like the Quad, is essentially a tool designed to limit the strategic options of the People's Republic of China. From Australia's perspective, this is important for the following reasons. Australia was having ongoing difficulties with the French regarding the short-fin Barracuda submarine design, the Australians claiming that the French were unresponsive to their technical requirements for the new boats. The French offering of a nuclear-powered boat would have saddled Australia with French nuclear technology that would have required periodic refueling in France around once every 7 years, whereas the recent US-UK offering has a nuclear fuel solution that would last the life of the boat, around about 35 years, and would not require Australia to have any supporting nuclear power industry if the country wanted a national sovereign capability to support nuclear-powered boats in Australia. Over the last couple of years, but especially during 2020, PRC-Australian relations have reached an all-time low. China imposing trade sanctions on Australia after the Morrison government called for an international investigation into the origins of COVID-19 at the pandemic's ground zero in Wuhan, China. In June of 2020, Australia was hit by a comprehensive cyber attack by a large cyber actor, essentially code for the PRC. And then there were Australian fears of Chinese penetration of the country's political system, which famously came to light during the Sam Dastyari affair. From Britain's perspective, AUKUS offered the country a heightened international role following on from Brexit, and potentially the ability to sell nuclear boats to Australia. From the American perspective, AUKUS effectively allowed one key ally, Australia, to strengthen itself using nuclear-powered submarines, thereby allowing the Royal Australian Navy to move around the Indo-Pacific faster in support of US naval operations. The announcement ambushed the Macron government, since Scott Morrison publicly scuppered the French submarine deal, which arguably put a huge dent on French aspirations to use its deal with Australia to cement future military exports into the Indo-Pacific region. Dropping the short-fin Barracuda contract also hurt French national pride, something that is often derided or made fun of in the Anglosphere. Macron's decision to withdraw his ambassadors from Australia and the United States in retribution was largely symbolic of a man struggling domestically with poor polling, hoping to draw outraged French patriots around the flag and around his government. There is, of course, the problem that any trade deals the Australians may wish to make with the European Union, or any goodwill the British hope to get from Brussels, may be given short shrift in the short to medium term, considering France's considerable heft in the European Union. For many years, in fact predating the Collins-class submarines, there has been a faction within the Royal Australian Navy that wanted nuclear-powered boats. The problem was that the Australian public, on both sides of politics, but particularly on the left, have been anti-nuclear. Therefore, it was considered politically impossible for any government to convince the Australian people of the utility of buying nuclear-powered submarines. Because of the secrecy surrounding the AUKUS deal, it wasn't only the French who were blindsided. The Australian Labor Party, Australia's political opposition, quietly accepted the deal, and there is bipartisan consensus that the Morrison initiative is in Australia's national interest. The only leftist party to have offered public resistance were the Greens, but as they are considered weak on national security issues, they were not considered credible in this area, and not by Australia's political parties or by most of the Australian voting public. With the French deal, Australia's short-fin Barracuda was to incorporate pump jet technology, which effectively replaces traditional screws with a propulsor or pump jet. This type of design reduces the chances of noise to near zero and allows for quieter operation compared to traditional screw-designed boats. As enhanced conventional boat propulsion goes, this theoretically would have made the short-fin Barracuda far quieter on operation than the Royal Australian Navy's current Collins-class fleet. Operating a submarine at less than 2 knots, only meters above an irregular seabed, or bottoming undetected for a prolonged period of time are tasks best suited for a conventional submarine. So the submarine deal effectively traded one useful capability, that is, gathering intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance in shallow littoral seas, that is, the primary area of operations in and through the archipelagic island chain to Australia's north, to long-distance, deep water operations in support of US Navy surface and subsurface assets wherever they are deployed. Notwithstanding the advances made in noise reduction in shallow waters, the acoustic signature of a nuclear submarine will rarely be hidden. The infrared signature of a nuclear power plant is detectable in nearly all sea states due to reactor heat. Close to the ocean floor, the cooling water intake on nuclear submarines are prone to collecting contaminants. In contrast, today's conventional submarines are extremely quiet with low infrared and magnetic signatures. When powered by lithium-ion batteries and air-independent propulsion, these submarines can operate quietly or sit on the seabed for several weeks without surfacing. For Australia, a key problem will be crewing larger nuclear-powered boats. Recruitment and retention within the Australian Defence Force has been a perennial problem, made worse by the fact that fewer and fewer young Australians seek a military career. Building nuclear-powered submarines might also be a problem as well. Australia's experience with building the Collins class will not be automatically transitioned to the new class of boats, whether they be British or American designed. The fact is, Collins is a small diesel-electric powered boat, while either an American Virginia class or a British Astute class boat are far larger and the engineering on them more complex than that of Collins. It has been said that AUKUS is not an alliance. However, this is not how the Chinese or even the French view it. It is a grouping of Anglosphere countries with very close strategic level and cultural ties. And while little is known how AUKUS will develop, since it is still currently a work in progress, there has been speculation that it is not just about building Australia's new nuclear-powered submarine fleet, but it is also about consolidating trilateral ties in other activities such as space and cyber. Has this made Australia more of a strategic target for Chinese espionage or ballistic missile attack, either nuclear or conventional? We at Sage International have always considered China primarily an intelligence and trade threat to Australia, as opposed to a direct military threat. China only becomes a military threat to Australia were we to join a US-led action against the People's Republic. And such action would be limited to the seas near the Chinese mainland, the East China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, and the South China Sea, where the People's Liberation Army Navy is well protected by their A2AD missile umbrella. China's ICBM fleet is still too small to split it into minor contingencies, such as hitting American or Australian targets in Australia. Most, if not all, Chinese ICBMs would be focused on contingencies directly involving US power in the Western Pacific, that is, Guam, Hawaii, Alaska, and the west coast of the United States. Well, we hope that you enjoyed our summary of AUKUS and what it means. If you'd like to know more, please visit the Sage International site on sageinternational.com.au.